O registro fóssil é um arquivo que mostra a história da vida sobre a Terra e que inclui dados relacionados, como, por exemplo, a natureza dos estratos de rochas nas quais encontramos os restos de organismos, como, por exemplo, essas aqui. Os pesquisadores têm elaborado uma enorme base de dados que contém informações sobre os restos, as rochas, os processos, o espaço do tempo envolvido e a suposta ecologia destes organismos. Mas é importante relembrar que este registro não está unicamente formado por dados. Ele também inclui interpretações, e é por essa razão que não é puramente objetivo.
The rocks on the surface of the Earth are either igneous rocks, which means they were formed from volcanoes or rocks that were molten, metamorphic rocks, which are rocks that are formed by heat and pressure and changed from other kinds of rocks, and sedimentary rocks, rocks that are produced by the settling out in water or air of pieces of rock. So the rocks we're most interested in are the sedimentary rocks, the ones that have settled out and accumulated over time. And when we go to a place like Grand Canyon, we can see the walls of the canyon, these layers of rock beautifully exposed. And these rocks are like a history book, telling us the history of the Earth through time. In the standard model, people that believe the Earth has been here for millions of years, they will tell you that these layers accumulated over millions of years, slowly and gradually over the surface of the Earth. And sometimes fossils were preserved in these, and they become a part of the record. Those of us that have a alternative view of Earth history, that we think that the Earth was produced, at least the layers on the Earth were produced in a cataclysmic event a few thousand years ago, called the flood. This event produced these rocks very quickly, and in only maybe a year's time, many of these rocks were produced along with the fossils they contain. This is a very different view of the history of the Earth. In either case, when you look at these rocks, you are trying to interpret the history of the Earth. And so it's like a history book, but it's not written in words, it's written in rock and fossils. And we call this the geologic column.
The geologic column is a series of rock strata built up from a crystalline basement like granite, all the way up through sediments are forming today. And each one of those different parts of the geologic column will have a name, and it will have fossils unique to it.
The fossil record is how we talk about the different types of fossils that we find all over the Earth and the layers that we find them. So it is very consistent, and what I mean by that is if I go to a certain type of rock in South America and that same type of rock in Africa and Antarctica, I will find the same general types of fossils. So for instance, if I'm in the lowest part, which we call the Precambrian, you don't really find very many fossils there at all. It's kind of just like some single-celled organisms. There's some weird stuff called the Ediacaran fauna, which are found worldwide, but we don't really know what they are. But once you get into the Paleozoic, which is the next chunk of it up, you find just abundant animal fossils and some plant fossils too. The lowest ones you find are all what we call marine invertebrates, so it'd be things like clams and snails and trilobites and different animals like that, starfish and things. And then as you make your way up in the Paleozoic, you'll find fish and then amphibians and reptiles. And then you can jump in the Mesozoic, which is the next chunk up, and that's where you find dinosaurs and pterosaurs and the big marine reptiles. And also birds and mammals show up there in the first part as you're making your way up. And then the Cenozoic, which is the newest part, and in there you would find that's kind of what they call the age of mammals. So there's no more dinosaurs in there, no more pterosaurs or big marine reptiles, but you'll get lots of mammals and birds, and there are other reptiles and amphibians you find, very modern looking ones. And that's kind of the record that you find. So far we haven't found like a dog fossil mixed in with a dinosaur mixed in with a trilobite. You typically find them set in these very distinct areas, and they usually appear to be in some kind of an order.
Ler as histórias escritas na matéria física do nosso planeta é algo que cativa o ser humano desde a Grécia Antiga. Mas não foi até pouco mais de 200 anos que o estudo dos fósseis e rochas sedimentares levou os cientistas a observarem uma ordem consistente nos depósitos a nível global. Descobrimento que marcou o ponto de partida de uma corrida para nomear e descrever cada uma das posteriormente chamadas de camadas geológicas.
The Paleozoic, the lowest fossil layers, don't have any dinosaurs. Sorry, guys. But you have the Cambrian, the Ordovician, the Silurian. It turns out these were named for locations by the people that were describing them. Cambria, or Cumbria, was the Roman name for Wales. And so the Cambrian means fossils from Wales. The Ordovician and Silurian were two Celtic tribes, the Ordovici and the Siluri, who lived in Wales. Then the Devonian was from Devon or Devonshire, England. Then there's the Carboniferous, which were the coal measures, where the Industrial Revolution was starting in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and they used the coal to make steam engines. And so the coal measures were the Carboniferous. The only one outside of England in the Paleozoic that the Europeans recognize was the Tsar invited Murchison, one of the original describers of the fossil beds in England. He and Sedgwick together named the Devonian, and he named the Silurian. He was invited to Russia, and he went to the Ural Mountains near the town of Perm and studied the fossil strata there. And he found a series of layers that were on top of layers that had the same fossils as England in the Carboniferous, but were different. And so he named them the Permian, after the city of Perm, there in the Ural Mountains. The layers above the Paleozoic are the Mesozoic, made famous by the movie series Jurassic Park. You have the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. The Triassic was named in England for the three main types of beds that formed it. The Jurassic was named for the Jura Mountains of Switzerland, where some German scientists were studying actually ammonites. These, like the chambered nautilus, like the squid with a shell, as they changed going up through the layers. And then the Cretaceous was named for the chalk beds in Belgium, and Cretaceous is Latin for chalk. And the White Cliffs of Dover in England are chalk from the Cretaceous. So you see that these are place names, but they're places where the fossils that are there are unique compared to those above them or below them. And so it's the kind of fossil that tells what the age is. Now, I want to point out that nowhere in the world is the entire geologic column preserved. It's preserved in pieces in different places.
O melhor lugar do mundo para observar como as camadas ou estratos da coluna geológica estão depositadas é conhecido como The Grand Staircase, como uma grande escadaria, localizada nos estados de Arizona e Utah, nos Estados Unidos. Aqui podemos ver a maior parte dos estratos sedimentares da coluna geológica depositados horizontalmente e sem maiores modificações. Começando desde o fundo do Grand Canyon, com estratos do pré-cambriano e paleozoico, subindo para o norte chegamos às camadas do Mesozoico, no Cânion de Sião, e finalmente à parte superior da coluna geológica, no Cenozoico, no Cânion Bryce. Na fascinante aventura de explorar o que estas assombrosas paisagens nos relatam sobre as origens, é ainda mais interessante descobrir que a ordem que podemos ver nas camadas de rochas sedimentares e dos fósseis nestes lugares é a mesma que podemos ver em outras frações menores em todo o mundo.
Now these layers were named later. Originally, a creationist named the fossil rocks the primary, the secondary, the tertiary, and the quaternary. 1, 2, 3, 4. And to him, beds 1 were the crystal and basement rocks. 2 were the hard limestone-like rocks, the secondary. The tertiary were the softer sediment rocks, like found in Italy. And the quaternary was the modern sediments. Charles Lyell in 1823 split up the tertiary, convinced a French scientist to study the fossil seashells from Italy. And in the lower beds in Italy, they contained about 3% living species, 97% were extinct. The next layer up was the Miocene. He named it contained 20% living species, and the Pliocene contained 90% living. So it started off with those 3. Lyell later added the quaternary for the ice ages. The Paleocene is the only one that's named on plants. It was discovered that in the layers below the Eocene in the Paris Basin, there were fossil plants. And so they became the Paleocene. And then some scientists in northern Germany on the North Sea discovered that there was a layer between the Eocene and the Miocene that had seashells that were different from either one, but in between. And so that one was named Oligocene. So those were named based on percentages of living animals. All of the rest of them are place names, have nothing to do with evolution. And even the tertiary doesn't have anything to do with evolution, really. It has to do with extinction. So these names originally had no evolutionary context, no time context, except relative time. If a layer is on top of another layer, it has to be younger. The other layer had to be there before the other one could be laid on top of it. Now it doesn't say, relative dating doesn't say how much later or earlier, just relatively earlier or later.
O princípio da ciência moderna foi marcado pela influência da nobreza. Este é o caso do conhecido como período elisabetano, no reinado de Isabel I da Inglaterra. Esta foi uma época de intenso desenvolvimento econômico, cultural e social, que influenciaram diretamente no desenvolvimento das ciências. Foi neste tempo, após décadas de discussões e imersos em tensas relações com a igreja dominante, que o que se percebeu como uma contradição entre algumas crenças religiosas e as observações da ciência introduziu o conflito que se projetaria até a atualidade.
Oftentimes, people associate the fossil record with millions or billions of years, and that's one way you can look at it. But the fossil record itself does not tell us how old it is. The fossil record has information in it that tells us how long things took to get deposited, and it has radioisotopes that can be used to interpret the age in terms of millions of years. And oftentimes, these different kinds of indicators of time don't match. So we may see evidence of rapid deposition, and that doesn't fit with the idea of millions or billions of years. So those of us who believe that the fossil record is a record of life on the Earth in a short time will suggest that there must be other interpretations of the fossil record than millions of years.
So we need to separate the data from the interpretations of those data. And when we do that, we can see that the rocks are real. There's no question about those, and they have fossils in them. But that doesn't mean that they were millions of years old. In fact, when we study them carefully without the bias of the million years of years in our minds, we see much evidence that says these can't be that old. Those rocks had to have been put there rather rapidly.
We are finding these kinds of evidences as we look at the geologic column that suggests that it accumulated much more rapidly than the standard model would allow. But the geologic column is the basis of this, and we understand the relationship of these layers. We know that if a layer is overlying another layer, it means that it was deposited after that layer. And so the whole picture that is built up over the years of the geologic column is, this is something we can use.
Quando observamos a distribuição dos fósseis na coluna geológica, há algo que chama particularmente a atenção. Os restos de dinossauros aparecem e desaparecem repentinamente no registro fóssil. É dizer, seus ossos surgem sem nenhum antepassado ou precursor conhecido. Isto representa um grande problema, particularmente para teorias que propõem a macroevolução, a qual deveria manifestar-se no registro fóssil através de uma aparição gradual dos dinossauros, evoluindo a partir de antepassados menos complexos. Porém, o único que encontramos são dinossauros, completamente formados, bem adaptados ao seu ambiente e diversificados.
We are always trying to look for more evidence of dinosaurs. And a lot of people want to know, how can I find a dinosaur? So I tell them, first you have to go to the right part of the geologic column. We have to look in the Mesozoic. That's the middle part of the geologic column. And then we have to find layers that are not marine. They aren't ocean deposits. Instead, they're land deposits like this one. And then we just have to exert a lot of hard work to see if there is anything there.
In order to find any kind of fossil, you want to be looking in sedimentary rocks. So igneous rocks are forming from magma or volcanoes. That's not going to help you. And metamorphic rocks are rocks that have been altered by heat and pressure, so it might destroy fossils that are in there. Whereas sedimentary, it's going to just be sediments that are being moved by water or wind or something, and those could collect bones and preserve them. So with dinosaurs, what you're looking at is between what we call the Mesozoic rocks. And so you're going to be going in the Triassic, Jurassic, or Cretaceous rocks. And they're only ever found in those layers. We never find them higher up. We never find them lower than that. And then it's just a question of, where are you in the world? What happens to be there?
The middle part of the geologic column, the Mesozoic, contains all the remains of dinosaurs that we have anywhere. From the upper Triassic through the upper Cretaceous, we find dinosaurs. And when they first appear, they look like dinosaurs. And when they last appear, they're dinosaurs. So they don't seem to have given rise to anything else. They don't seem to have come from anything else. They're just there. It fits with that idea that these are created forms of life that have been preserved perhaps in a global flood or some other event like that.
Depósitos remanescentes de uma diversidade que deslumbra ante a perspectiva de um extravagante passado natural. Fósseis e sedimentos ordenados em uma sequência que nos cativa, ao contar em pedaços uma história que agora é nosso dever reconstruir.
So the question comes up, how do you sort these things? How do you get order in the fossil record? And my explanation is what I call biome succession. In other words, as the floodwaters rose, they encountered different habitats and washed them out and buried them in the order of the rising water. I think the big action of the flood wasn't 40 days and 40 nights of rain. It was the tsunamis that accompanied the movement of the plates through the oceans during the flood. You've all probably seen or can see on YouTube pictures of Indonesia with a tsunami coming in and the destruction and what have you. That's a little tsunami and just one. What if the whole plates were moving and not just one earthquake? I believe that tsunamis stripped the fauna and flora from an area and then transported it back out.
So we're seeing a transition from the bottom, you have nothing but marine, and then you're looking at, it looks like it's moving up toward coastal environments and then toward land environments. Then in the Mesozoic, you get lots of land environments. Of course, you also have marine environments all the way through the record. The oceans were there all the time, but the land animals are not getting buried all the time, and just in certain later parts of the record. So some people have, or one person, Harold Clark, suggested maybe the explanation is that before the flood, the plants and animals were structured ecologically, and if the flood destroyed them in such a way that the water rose and destroyed, rose higher and destroyed, rose higher and destroyed, you would get this sequence of increasing elevation. And so that's been proposed. It hasn't been studied very much. In fact, it's kind of surprising how little it has been studied. There's probably a lot of complicating factors in it, but it's at least a place to start thinking about it. Maybe there's ecological zonation in the fossil record, in addition to some other things.
There has to be an explanation for why we see this worldwide order in the fossil record. It cannot be because of evolution, because there is no mechanism that can explain the evolutionary processes that are described by those that believe in them. So we have to figure out, what does the order mean? It must have something to do with the processes that were involved in deposition of the layers, and they must have been uniform over the whole world. So, for example, the animals that we see in the bottom represent not simple organisms, but very complex organisms, and that those complex organisms were buried first because they lived in the environments that were covered first by the waters of the flood. So those would be things that lived on the bottom of the ocean, for example. Then as we go up the fossil record, what we're really doing is climbing out of that hole. And so we gradually begin to see things that lived on land and land plants, and then we finally see animals that lived on land, and ultimately this is a worldwide phenomenon. So the burial process, the depositional process, must have been something that was worldwide and catastrophic to preserve the remains.
The problem we have in explaining that is we've never seen a global flood. We don't know how it happened, but There are some things we can say. We can say clearly there was a sequence of events that affected the animals, that killed the animals in a certain order. It killed one kind of animals and it got buried, then it killed another kind of animals and they got buried, and so on. And so you have an order resulting from the sequence of events. So we might think a catastrophic event would be just chaos, but not necessarily. I remember a paper describing sediments deposited by a big tornado in the eastern United States. And it looks like chaos on the surface, but when the sediment gets put underwater and deposited, it makes a very orderly sequence of deposits. And that's what we see in the geologic column.
What I think we can understand is that what you see in the fossil record really is kind of environments stacked on top of each other. Occasionally you'll find animals that don't seem to be in an environment and it seems to be a destroyed environment. That doesn't make sense. But usually you'll find a whole community of animals that are buried together. And whatever kind of a flood model we have to be able to explain how you keep communities of animals together, that we don't mix them. And if that's the case, I would suggest that somehow you're keeping almost an entire ecosystem intact as you're burying it. Now, the evolutionists would look at that and say, well, clearly that's not a flood. You're just looking at ecosystems changing with time. But what's interesting is you don't find like transitional ecosystems like you might expect. It's like, all right, I've got Morrison Jurassic stuff, and then boom, I've got Lower Cretaceous stuff, and then I've got Upper Cretaceous stuff, and they might be buried on top of each other, and it's just like a completely different ecosystem, like it just came in from a different spot. And maybe it did. Maybe that whole thing washed in and boom, dropped on top of this one, and washed in and dropped on top of that one. So this is stuff that we really need to study. We need to seek to understand it because these are challenges to a flood model, but I think in the end we might have better answers for what's going on than the evolutionists.
Conhecer o que realmente aconteceu é muito mais que uma curiosidade científica. A forma em que compreendemos as origens se relaciona com uma cosmovisão, uma forma de ver o mundo que permeia cada aspecto de nossa existência. Uma perspectiva cuja riqueza e assertividade se encontram em uma atitude, a mesma que é a verdadeira razão de ser da ciência.